Hi, I'm Alan Rusbridger, editor of Prospect Magazine, and you're about to watch the interview portion of the latest episode of Media Confidential with myself and Lionel Barber, in which we speak to a special guest. If you want to watch the full episode, please click on the link below, and if you want to subscribe to Prospect Magazine, please visit our website at www.prospectmagazine.co.uk. Enjoy.
Well, we're thrilled to be joined in Prospect Towers by James Harding. What are you, James? The owner, the proprietor, the editor-in-chief? All of those? All of the above?
Nothing quite as grand, Alan. I'm the editor and founder of Tortoise.
Editor and founder of Tortoise. And we're here because Tortoise, if you'll forgive me saying so, is a minnow in the media world, a very plucky minnow. And it's, to everyone's surprise, made a bid for a much larger beast, the Observer, a few weeks ago. And it's fair to say that this has been quite a rocky process. And I think we should probably begin by saying a couple of things in this conversation. One is that Lionel and I both know you, James, and admire you, and also that I haven't come across anybody in talking about this who doesn't really admire you as a journalist. I'm speaking to somebody in Guardian Towers today who said, James is a really good bloke and we love Tortoise. So the question has really been around the sort of the process of how this has happened and also the sort of financial details of it. So we might get into those a bit. But why don't you begin, James, by just saying how things came about, what inspired you to make this offer, and what you think you could do for this venerable 230-odd-year-old title?
Well, thank you, and thank you both for having me here. Look, I think if we just stand back and start by standing back, I suppose we all look around and see a world in which journalistic enterprises are being turned into political projects. In this country, you look at GB News, or you look at what's just happened at The Spectator, or actually, Alan, what you've been writing about, the Jewish Chronicle, all these places where political agendas are trumping, journalistic enterprise. And then that's before you've got to Elon Musk's Twitter or Newsmax, or, of course, we've just had the Washington Post. If anything stood for truth speaking to power, it's the Washington Post. And then you have a moment where it seems as though the owner and the CEO are putting political calculation and personal consideration above journalistic principle. And so we look at what's happening in the world, and particularly in the world of journalism, and worry about how we're going to get the resources to do evidence-based reporting, have informed opinion, ensure that there's independent thinking. And the reason that when we looked at The Observer, and this was more than a year ago now, and I've taken a keen interest in The Observer for more than a decade now, you thought there's an amazing opportunity there because it is, as you say, the world's oldest Sunday newspaper. It's got a heritage like no other. I think it's got a place in the world, not just in the world of UK journalism, but in the world where it cares about art and culture and the good things in life as much as it does politics and news and what's happening in the world. But it sorely lacks resources. It needs a vision for how it's going to see its way through the 21st century. And we have, what we think is really exciting, is we have brought together, for the first time in a generation, a group of people who want to put energy and investment into taking the Observer and seeing a new chapter for it, investing in effect in responsible liberal journalism. I don't think we've seen that in this country for a generation, and that's why we think there's something really to be excited about.
James, resources really do matter. Who are the financial backers of Tortoise Media?
So we have, Lionel, a group of shareholders. We've always been completely transparent about our owners. All the names are on the on company's house.
A little sample?
It will give you a sample. So our core investors, as we started, when we started Tortoise, the lead investor was David Thompson of Thomson Reuters through his family investment company. He's been one of the key investors getting us started. He's not the person who's driving investment into The Observer. We had a bunch of others. a VC called Local Globe, a bunch of other kind of individuals, family offices. The
Former
two key
ambassador
investors
to the United Kingdom, the Court of St. James, Matthew Barson.
is our chairman.
Yes.
So Matthew
Did he put
Barson
money
is-
in?
At the beginning, yes, he did, yeah. So Matthew Barson is a co-founder of mine. He was the Obama's ambassador, as you say, to London, and before that in Sweden. He also ran a digital startup. That's where he started out. And so
CNET.
CNET, exactly, that's it. But the two key new investors as part of this observer process, This Day, which is the philanthropic foundation and impact investment arm of Gary Lubner, and Standard Investments, which has invested in things like Puck. Well, these are all US digital media startups: Puck, Airmail, Pushkin, the podcasting outfit. So this is the group of investors. And the reason I say that group matters is that what we've been trying to do, and we spent, as I said, a year trying to get a group together that's right for the Observer, is to make sure that we have the money we need from investors we want with values we share. They're all in it for the long term. They all sign up explicitly to the principle of editorial independence. And none of them, Lionel, have a controlling stake. None of them, in fact, even have a blocking minority share. And so that, we think, is really important in ensuring that the Observer, for whom editorial independence is so key, and you go back to the kind of the great campaigns of the Observer, the great kind of, frontline journalism of the Observer, its dogged reporting of South Africa, it's had courage, and you need to have editorial independence to have courage.
Now, wearing my old Financial Times hat, which I think you have a pink hat too, that's where we first met, two loss-making news organizations, put them together. How do you make the sums add up?
I think that, and hope that, at Tortoise we bring the energy and expertise of an incredible group of editors. So the former editor of the Today programme, the chief leader writer of the Times, and also a very young and dynamic newsroom.
I think everybody understands that. You've got talented journalists. The problem is the numbers.
But I think it's important, because I think that we'll get into the financials.
Please.
The energy of a startup, the energy of a digital news organisation that is in the business of building things, combined with the incredible expertise and cultural authority of the people on the Observer. I think if you put those two things together, I just think editorially, that's a voice that could really make a difference. Now, how do you make the business work? I think it's a really key question. So let's talk about the challenges for both. If you are the Observer, if you are a print-only product, you have no digital expression of your own.
The Observer, because they're under the Guardian.
Yes, but they have no digital brand, digital identity of their own. All of their journalism is published under the Guardian. There's an attribution of the Observer, as you know. How do you make that work as a business? When the Guardian bought it in 1993, it had a circulation of just over 500,000 on a Sunday. When Alan looked at closing it, actually, I'd love to talk to you, Alan, about exactly what happened.
Oh, this is getting interesting.
But at that time, it had sales of 385,000. Now it's got sales of just over 100,000. And the truth is that print's declined everywhere. That wouldn't be a problem if you had a digital expression, if you had a way of taking in digital subscriptions or digital advertising, but the Observer doesn't. Now, you'd say, okay, what about Tortoise? If you're Tortoise and you're trying to be a digital startup, in order to get the brand recognition that some of these others have, you need to spend a huge amount on marketing. So who's made it work? If you look at someone like The Atlantic, right now, a different creature, a monthly magazine in the US, but a few years back it was losing $20 million a year. It was a fading print product. And what they did is they took print, they built out a digital expression of it. It's now got more than 1 million digital subscribers, and it went from losing $20 million to making just over $3 million. If you look at The Spectator, it makes about £20 million in revenue, about £2 million in profit. Again, a similar example. A pretty small print run, and then a meaningful, if modest, growth of digital subscribers in the tens of thousands. So what we think is that you can see, if you get this right, if you take a great brand with really high quality journalism, you can build a print and digital subscription business that means that it's a viable business, but also a more powerful progressive voice in the world.
But it has to be a daily digital operation.
A daily digital operation, true, but not a 24/7 news operation. So the ones that work are saying, we're going to offer you something distinctive, something different. Either that is evidence-based reporting, in-depth original investigations, concise analysis, original opinion. People are paying for that and for a quality and distinctive voice. And I think that you can see a world in which people are not being fed, just another torrent of news. People are already turning off with an overflow of information. And I think, Lionel, we're just beginning to see what AI is going to do in terms of just the volumes of content coming at us. Actually, quality, something that is distinctive, something that has a character to it, I think is going to be even more valuable.
So to go back to 2009, when we looked at 4 options, 3 of which was to keep the Observer as a brand within the Guardian. Mm-hmm. And the 4th was to have a Guardian on Sunday, but we went with the option, one of the options of keeping the Observer within the Guardian, but it was losing a lot of money. That's why we looked at all that. How much money do you think it's losing now? What have you been told? Is it that the Observer is within £5 million of breaking even, or is it that it's such a drain on the Guardian that they really have to get rid of it?
The only reason I just want to make this point, Alan, it is important, is that I think people are deeply concerned about whether or not the Scott Trust is there or isn't there to support the Observer. Our understanding from your meetings at the time in 2009, from the statement of the Scott Trust since then, has been that the Scott Trust responsibility is to the Guardian journalism in perpetuity and not the Observer. Now, let's put this...
If you go to the Scott Trust website, I think it's stated quite clearly. It says our job is to maintain the Guardian in perpetuity. And then next sentence is a secondary purpose is to sustain British liberal journalism in Britain, which is effectively code for the Observer. And then it says, so long as it doesn't threaten the first purpose. So back to my question to you, okay. Are we in a position where the Observer is threatening the long-term sustainability of the Guardian? Or is it just losing 2 or 3 million and you come along with your investment? But which is it?
So let me have a go at giving an outsider's view of how the Observer looks. Looking from the outside in, you see a paper that's had the print decline that I mentioned. I think in 2009, I think the headcount of the Observer was around 170 people. It's now down to about 75. It no longer has its own foreign staff. It no longer has its own reporters on business. It no longer has its own sports reporters. And when you talk to people inside the Guardian and the Observer, they'll tell you that we expect the next thing is that home news gets subsumed by the Guardian too, that the paper itself gets condensed. And actually, we think that when you look at any sensible accounting of the Observer, it's losing money. A significant sum. I don't think I want to do, I think it's fair to do kind of external accounting.
The last published accounts of the Tortoise were about £4 million loss, and I know you think it's improved since then, but you put a £4 million loss with, let's call it, 4 or 5 million for the Observer. On paper, you've got now 2 organisations losing about 8 billion. Yeah. You talked about the Spectator, which is making a profit on a circulation of 90,000 paid subscriptions of 90,000. I think your ambition for the Observer is 170,000. So you're going to be twice as successful as the Spectator, starting from a position of combined loss of about 8 million, is that?
The Observer currently has just over 110,000 sales a week. So I think the Spectator comparison probably doesn't quite hold. But what we're arguing is...
That's print, isn't it?
Yes, and the 90,000 is print and digital for the Spectator. So what we're arguing is, can you see a world in which, with investment, with building a digital identity for the Observer, you can grow digital subscriptions, you grow advertising? Can you see a world in which you grow to breaking even after about 3 years and delivering, a small but substantial profit, right, in 28, 29? Yes, we can. And I don't think we're doing that by claiming, we're going to get to Atlantic scale digital subs. We're going to grow those in the tens of thousands. And, your question, which is, if it's a tiny loss, well, then should the Scott Trust take it on? Actually, I think that the Scott Trust, if you read its report, is saying our responsibility is the future of The Guardian, investing in what it does, its priorities. This is not about kind of malice or judgment towards the Observer. I think people hold the Observer in enormously high regard. It's not a strategic fit. If you're The Guardian, you want to grow digitally. If you want to grow globally, and even if you want to grow in print in the UK, you're probably more focused on Saturday, certainly, than the Observer. You're thinking to yourself, how do I responsibly take care of this great brand in news? And I think that what we are saying is we have £25 million of investment. The majority of it we spend in the first 2 years to build a digital platform, to build a commercial team, to recruit editorial talent so that we can go out and grow those digital subs and grow that revenue. And what we look at, the most successful journalistic organizations in the world and see that they're not charity cases. We don't want to come with a trust fund. We want to come with enough money to turn the business around, establish a successful business, and one that can stand on its own 2 feet. Because when we look at the New Yorker, or we look at the Atlantic, or we look at the FT, we look at the Economist or the Spectator, we actually take some real comfort from the fact that quality journalism can actually be self-sustaining as a business and also retain its values, its editorial values.
Right, James, time for a real softball question. You've got Tortoise Media and you have The Observer. What is the single brand?
The Observer.
So Tortoise Media is going to disappear.
We're going to combine both newsrooms. The Observer will be the brand.
Right.
Just, let's be really the most important thing here are the readers. There are people the people here who love and believe in The Observer. We think there's another generation of people who are going to read it, not just in print, but on their screens. And they look to The Observer to do things in terms of understanding the world and the life they lead. And we're excited about doing that.
If I'm a Tortoise Media journalist, am I not worried that actually I could be the one who gets laid off in this new streamlined single brand?
No, because the whole point of this from the very start has been to say this is not someone swooping in trying to turn a journalistic enterprise into a political project. This is a group of people. And whereas some of these other deals, the money has gone to the owners, this is investment in journalism. And from the very start, The Guardian has been absolutely clear we need to look out for their people, and we've been very clear we need to look out for ours, and we're going to bring a newsroom together. And the excitement, Lionel, look at what we've done in podcasts, look at the investigative journalism we've done,
and
look at the events, look at the newsletters, look at the data journalism. We do things that are entirely complementary to what The Observer does.
You've done the sums. You think that you can break even and make in 3 years with 150 plus journalists, correct? All the Observer journalists and all the Tortoise Media journalists.
The model we've got is not just the journalists on staff. You're putting together staff numbers, and some of those numbers actually are not journalists, just to be clear. Some of those numbers will be people working on the business side, the tech side. But in addition to that, one of the things we're really committed to doing is growing the contributor budget, the commissioning budget, in fact, more than doubling it, because if you take a slightly different view in terms of what you're doing editorially, you're not trying to produce a daily newspaper on a Sunday.
I get it.
You've got...
But that's why the Spectator can make the numbers work, because it's working off a contributor business model. It's not a legacy product with lots and lots of journalists. That's how they got to profit.
When you look at The Observer, it's a product on a scale that is considerably bigger than The Spectator too. So its reach in terms of food, in terms of arts and culture, in terms of sport, in terms of international is much greater. We think that we can build a network. We already have a Tortoise, quite a network internationally. We can build a network that really delivers a different kind of inside opinion.
I'm just trying to get to a position where these numbers add up. Now, James, you've worked at the FT all those years, so you love numbers. And you were the former media editor, so you love the media too. You know lots. So I want to figure out, you've promised to invest 25 million over 5 years. Have you got that 25 million ready, or is it 10 million with a promise of 15?
We have the investment we need. We've structured it so that we can ensure we have the best possible group of investors. Our interest is seeing how do we build and grow the Observer. But yes, we have the money that we need from the investors.
Front-loaded.
Front-loaded.
So you've got enough money for 3 years, or have you got enough money front-loaded for 5?
The reason that it's important to understand the investment process is the question is how much do you want to invest in years 28, 29, right?
Yep.
And obviously that will depend on what your revenues are and what your profit position is, because the commitment from our investors is not to take any money out, right, for the first 5 years. So actually exactly how much you're going to invest in the last couple of years in that 5-year cycle depends on the performance over the first 3 years. So that's the reason why you front load to invest the investment so that you can drive the growth in the back half.
But you are obviously in those numbers baking in losses because you only hope to get to break even after 3 years. So that means, are you telling our global audience that your backers are essentially up, not just for investing 15 million or so over the first 3 years, but also swallowing another 10, 15 million of losses?
So I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, are they ready to take the losses, which you're going to be loss making for 3 years, right? Because you're promising break even after 3 years,
Yes.
right? So they've got to bear losses, right? And they're promising to invest.
So if you invest, when you grow a business, right, that
I have grown a business, by the way, but
yes, but not Lionel from a startup, or not from that point of view.
I haven't done what you
position,
did.
the position. This has been one of those things that's been, I think, widely misunderstood, or kind of, particularly within the Observer and amongst journalists at The Guardian, that there is revenue that will come from the Observer, revenue that will come from Tortoise. You put those together, and in addition, there's investment to fund, as I said, the commercial team, the tech build out, and editorial. Now, how do you then judge how much of that is, if you like, funding losses because you're putting costs in, and how much of that is investment in growth? Well, we take that whole chunk as investment. You don't break out in that context, if you like, operating loss and investment. The whole thing is to grow to break even. So they're not two separate line items there.
On the paper you're imagining, James, how many sections has it got?
So it's currently 5 sections, the Observer. There's the main news section, sport, the Observer New Review, the magazine, and Observer Food Monthly. And our commitment is to all 5. Our commitment, as I said, is to the readers, those people who come on Sunday, and that's what they look to from the Observer. But actually, if you stand back and say, well, what's the logic of that? We're much more interested in how do you grow the digital expression.
Just pause there, because you've got 5 sections. You're going to port over around about 70 journalists from the Observer, but that doesn't include the sports section,
Yes.
or the business section, or 30 correspondents for where are you going to get sport, business, and foreign policy?
Let's deal with sport first. We're going to do a sports section. I don't think that match reports are as important today as they were. You can see match reports almost as soon as the match ended. There are providers who do nothing but match reports. What's special, what's valuable, is sports reporting and sports writing that has an insight, that has an opinion, that has a prompt to make you think and see things differently. We think there is a network of people that we can pull together who will be enormously proud and excited to write for the Observer. And some of that may well be reporting that comes on a Saturday afternoon.
You're not buying that in from The Guardian, is it?
No, and I'm sure there'll be some Guardian journalists who will want to write for the Observer in the future, and I very much hope they do.
And you're not taking any foreign correspondence with you, so you're going to...
The Observer doesn't have any foreign correspondence of its own anymore. If you really believe, as I think they did in 1993, that the Observer should remain a separate title, a separate newsroom with a distinct voice and view on the world, you'd want the capacity to have a network of correspondents, superstringers, reporters who are able to go out and do the kind of journalism that only the Observer can do. And I think this is a really important point, Aaron. The competitive advantage that the Observer has is time. It comes out once a week in print. It should be able to do something that next to no paper does, certainly no paper in progressive journalism does, which is really have the time to go out and report, to try and take a judgment on things. If this thing works, The Guardian has the capacity to be kind of London's equivalent to the New York Times, a global news service, that speaks with a sense of what's happening in the world and a liberal set of values.
You've put together this bid, and you've done brilliantly with the Tortoise, but everything rests on your shoulders in a sense, where all these guarantees are come via you. Is it right you put in for the job at CNN last year?
No, I got a call about it from.
Well, you were down to the last two, weren't you?
Yeah.
So was everybody reported by media correspondents?
No, I think it was last three, actually.
Last three.
Were you in for it too, Lionel?
All I'm suggesting is that this operation is very dependent on you, and it was reported that you almost walked away from it last year.
No, I picked up the phone. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. Now, Alan, I think you're making a really important point, but the point I think argues for the structure of the approach we're taking. Look, there are people who have asked, how do you ensure the editorial independence? How do you ensure that what just happened in the Washington Post doesn't happen at the Observer? There's no Jeff Bezos. There's no person who has a single controlling stake. There's no one with a majority stake. There's no one even with a blocking minority. It's a group of people, and their investment is in the journalism, and their commitment is to editorial independence. So you can't have the situation where 11 days out from an election, the proprietor thinks, you know what, Donald Trump might win. He's got, as they say, a thin skin and the memory of an elephant. I better make sure that I ditch the Harris endorsement. We don't have that risk because we have a mix of owners, and no one has a controlling stake.
So you've been very clear, James, that this will be now the Observer brand. Will you be the editor?
So my expectation is, much as things currently run at The Guardian, there's an editor-in-chief. I'm not sure I'll quite have that title, but I'll take that role, and there'll be an editor in print, an editor in audio, and an editor in digital.
That sounds like fairly hands-off.
I think you can tell that my priority is absolutely what we do editorially, and so I think I'll be really engaged.
There's one point that the Guardian journalists have raised, and that you and Anna Bateson, the managing editor, the managing director of the Guardian, were friends, are friends.
Oh.
The question they say is, we don't really know what the value of the Observer is. I mean, if there had been a proper process, and if the Scott Trust decided that the Observer was not for them long term, they could have tested the market to see if there were other bidders out there. But it just looked as though this was a sort of that deal that didn't really go through the proper process. You've now got the threat of a strike vote from journalists of the Guardian Observer. Looking back, do you think the process could have been handled differently?
We being Matthew Barson, the chair, and I, wrote at the end of last year to the chairs of GMG and the Scott Trust to ask if they would even consider an approach for the Observer. They then asked us to submit a proposal to the GMG board. The GMG board then considered it and then gave the green light for us to proceed, at which point our board, the Tortoise board, and the GMG board appointed independent advisors to negotiate the terms of a prospective deal. We did that over the course of several months. The Scott Trust was then informed that an approach had been made. GMG then the board reviewed, and I understand Scott Trust members, not all of them, but some of them individually reviewed the structure of our proposal. The Scott Trust and GMG were then had sight of the offer that we were making, and we then sought to make it public to journalists at The Guardian and The Observer, precisely because the culture is to make sure that people are informed and included, and the proposal is properly debated. There's an understanding that the Guardian can't simply auction the Observer on the basis that there are a bunch of interests that simply the Guardian wouldn't accept the sale. They wouldn't sell, obviously, to a number of foreign states or individuals seeking a certain kind of influence. What they said to us was, the only way in which we would be willing to go ahead with this is to know, A, that it's in good hands, and B, that we have shared editorial values and respect for our editorial standards. And so what we've sought to do is come to them with a vision for its future, a commitment to those shared editorial values, and the capital to invest. And it's that mix of things that is the reason that I think we're in the talks that we're in.
James, given the vote last week, which was pretty heavily against criticising the Scott Trust, what chances, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, do you think there are now of this bid going ahead?
I think it will go ahead. We're working hard to make sure that we, A, hear the concerns that people within the union have. This is a change, and as Alan said, there are elements of this change that really came as a surprise, and people are trying to get their heads around it. There's a process in that, and I've spent a fair bit of time trying to explain what we're doing, what we're hoping to do. And there's a process that the NUJ has that's central to this, which is a discussion about the future terms and conditions in the company. And we are spending a lot of time trying to understand and make sure that we meet those, because as well as having commitments to the readers and the values of the Observer, what we also really wanted to say, look, is we have commitments to the journalists of the Observer too.
Thank you, James, founder, editor, and prospective media baron.
So we're now joined by Carole Cadwalladr, who is... well, actually, I was just asking who you were, Carole. You just said you were a writer for The Observer.
Feature writer.
A feature writer, possibly an investigative writer, but more broadly known as someone who has done brilliant work on stories like the Cambridge Analytica story, which was not short of legal difficulties, which we won't go into on this show. But you've been at The Observer for nearly 20 years. And you're a part of the ferment around. I think ferment is a right word. Can you explain why there is such strong feeling amongst Guardian and Observer staff about this bid?
So I think we should separate it out, because when we first heard about the bid, although there was shock and surprise and questions, there was, in some senses, that actually shake-up could be good in some ways. And we have felt under-trashed and undervalued within the Guardian family and under-resourced. And so suddenly the idea that along was coming some deep-pocketed alternative wasn't altogether wholly unwelcome in some respects. And I think we had an open mind going into it. I certainly did. From a personal point of view, I could see real benefits for myself. But I think it's that over the last weeks, we've just been there's been dozens of journalists doing due diligence on everything about this deal. And everything we find out about it alarms us more. And we do not feel that there is any kind of even medium-term sustainable strategy here for The Observer, 240-year-old newspaper. And we think that there has been a recklessness towards the conduct, actually, of this potential deal.
So tell us what you found out, or perhaps what you haven't found out, in terms of what the deal means, what you've been told.
What do you think is the right number in terms of investment to ensure that The Observer is sustainably profitable?
Well, I personally have absolutely no idea about that, because as far as I can see, there's been no scoping exercise analysis being done into that. And in fact, the fact is this has come as a bolt out of the blue. There's been no discussion at all, even with very senior Observer editors, about this sort of idea which has come out of nowhere, which is we're an existential risk to the entire organisation. This needs to be sorted immediately. We need to be sold by Christmas. I mean, this is all as I say, sort of come as a bolt out of the blue. And the only thing that Observer journalists have been asking and Guardian journalists have been asking for is a proper process. Like, let's have a proper process. Let's have the facts and the figures. Let's have the numbers. Let's understand the business fundamentals, and let's look at all of the options here. And I think we're really open to the options at this stage, whether that's staying within the organisation, which is absolutely where the NUJ insists that we should be, or whether there are other alternatives outside the organisation.
So before we talk about creative financial solutions, what is your best understanding of the current financial performance of the Observer, qua Observer?
We actually just don't have those figures.
That must be a bit troubling.
Well, and Anna Bateson, the managing director of The Guardian, wrote to the whole staff on Thursday, I think, saying that they'd shared the profit and loss figures with you. So what...
They have, but the profit and loss exercise, and I'm not the best person to talk about this, but as I understand it, there was a profit and loss exercise done, which you could do on any department at The Guardian. I think if we did that on foreign news, what we'd discover is that that's a net loss to the newspaper rather than a contributor to the bottom line. And so you can, I think any single department within the entire organisation would show very similar profit loss, but that's not how we think about journalism. We don't think of it, we don't disaggregate it in that way. We look at the overall value. So
this popular view, certainly not espoused on this show, but the popular view that the Observer and Tortoise Media are in effect two drunkards propping each other up beside a bar is actually not correct.
It's so incorrect. So can we look at that? So at the moment we're a net contributor to the Guardian's bottom line in the fact that print makes money and that contributes to the Guardian's bottom line. Whereas Tortoise, what we see is that this is a financially struggling startup. It has no real brand recognition in any way. I think it made 4.6 million loss on 6.2 million revenue in its last set of accounts. This is not what nobody is looking at this thinking this is a financially robust, successful story with a clear business model and a pathway to success. Nobody is seeing that. What we are seeing and what we understand is the case is that Tortoise needs to raise more money, and we are the means by which it's able to do that.
What do you think should happen? I mean, this email went out on Thursday saying, you better do the deal or the baby gets it. It was slightly a menacing tone. If you don't do the deal, then, who knows what we're going to have a thorough look at the Observer. What, in your view, should happen? Should the whole process be stopped? Should other bids be entertained? What do you think should happen?
So to explain, I'm speaking out uncomfortably.
And all credit for you coming on the programme. You've shown a lot of courage, both in your comments on Twitter and for coming on. So we won't hold you as a representative of Guardian management.
Well, I can't. The problem is that we have 700 journalists.
That's a lot. That's more than.
As I understand it.
No wonder you've got losses.
Across the Guardian and Observer. The Guardian and Observer are speaking in one voice here because we are one organisation. So first off, this myth that the Observer is a UK print product only. Myth, 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 myth. All of our journalism appears on the Guardian website as Guardian journalism, beneath which there's a little message saying, please give money to the Guardian. My biggest stories went out globally, which this was done by an Observer team. It absolutely went out as Guardian journalism, and it raised millions for the organisation in doing so. So that bit is a myth, and that's why I think very much Guardian and Observer journalists are standing together here, because we understand this isn't just a threat to the Observer, it's a core threat to Guardian journalism, to Guardian journalists. And at a time when I think we can see so clearly how much we need robust, strong, independent news organisations. Like here we are on the eve of the US election. That's never been more clear.
What would you like to happen?
Well, I can speak. There's two answers here. So the NUJ is very clear. There's a ballot which has gone out now in which we're looking to take collective action. That's looking like a strike. And that is because we believe that this deal will lead ultimately to the degradation of the Guardian's journalism, to a catastrophic loss of trust with the readers, to a diminishing of UK media plurality, and as such a threat to press freedom. And we're, that's what's on the table. We'll have to see. In the indicative ballot, there was a 97% vote in favour of industrial action, with 93% in favour of a strike. My colleagues don't feel able to speak out. That's what's going on. I'm doing so because I have my own personal reasons, really, I feel it would be dishonest, actually. I have been supported financially, morally, all sorts of ways by Observer and Guardian readers. They supported me, hundreds of thousands of pounds of support during my legal case. And I understand that's the key relationship that we as journalists have, is with our readers. And that's where, in that sense, I feel our loyalties lie.
Well, I don't want to depress you further, Carole, but if you don't accept the bid by Tortoise Media, you're in a rather difficult position, because The Guardian has made it quite clear that it sees no future for the Observer under the Guardian umbrella and under the umbrella of the Scott Trust. So where are you going to go?
I mean, there is such an interesting conversation and discussion that needs to be had here. Is the Scott Trust fit for purpose in this scenario? Is the Scott Trust a custodian, a proper and fit custodian of the Guardian's and Observer's journalism? And I put those two things together again. And how was this decision made? So we have really big questions about the governance of this organisation, which has enabled this exclusive and confidential deal to go ahead with one single preferred bidder without any attempt to put an estimate on the value of the Observer, to seek other investors, to put together a package, to talk to journalists about what the possibilities are. And that for us is something that's really serious. And the reason why it's not just serious for the future of the Observer, the reason why it's serious, it's an existential threat, I believe, to the future of the entire news organisation, is because, Rupert Murdoch's business model is not to say, I'm really great and my organisations are really great and you should just give me your money. Like, that doesn't work. That's why he has a paywall. But the Guardian's business model is to say, here we are, we're different from other news organisations. We're not profit seeking. We are here to defend journalism, and you please give us your money to do so. And
they are profit seeking.
They are.
It's not a totally charitable
No.
operation here. Guardian is also a public company.
But it doesn't return profit to shareholders in that sense.
Correct, but it needs to be profitable.
It needs to be profitable, but it also...
That's what I'm it doesn't need to be profitable.
But the entire business model rests on a contract between the organisation and its readers, right? That trust is fundamental to it. And at the moment, what you have is a huge breach of trust with the organisation's journalists. And if you've lost the organisation's journalists, then how are you going to keep the readers on board? And that's why I think it's really profound what's happening here. And the point is, the organisation has been insulated from it so far because all of these journalists have felt inhibited from being able to speak out and talk freely. And as I say, I've made my choice around this for my own particular reasons. But there is no doubt that we should be having more of a public discussion that involves the readers too, in what the possibilities for the future are.
One of the interesting things about the history of The Guardian and The Observer, and people with longer memories will remember that one of the reasons the Guardian bought The Observer was it was about to be closed down by The Independent. They were going to buy it, merge it with The Independent on Sunday, but by Observer. So that was back in 19...
And the Independent was seen as a threat, a competitive threat to the Guardian as well.
Absolutely.
That was kind of key to it, wasn't it?
It was a defensive measure, and also it protected the Observer. And I know, because I was there at the time, that the aim was to effectively merge these two readerships. They're both liberal readerships, put them together, and everyone's happy. In fact, the history has shown that actually the Observer readership is significantly different from the Guardian readership. And the paper has a different kind of liberal tradition. And I think some people who are worried about that liberal tradition being endangered are very aware of that. How would you describe that difference between the Guardian and the Observer?
Well, this is why, so to be honest with you, I mean, the thing about the Observer is, and this is talking to a lot, I mean, we've been talking to so many people, outside experts in so many different spheres. And one thing you would say is that the Observer is this amazing heritage brand, which, it's a really rare opportunity for the right kind of investors, because we've got this, absolutely unsurpassed internationalist heritage. And, one of the things which the Observer is very proud of, quite rightly, is, it's credited from keeping Nelson Mandela off death row. Really committed to the anti-apartheid struggle. It was a letter in the Observer that led to the launch of Amnesty International Index on Censorship, dates its antecedents to the Observer. And that internationalist, outward-looking heritage, it is something which you just can't buy in this day and age. That, for me, is this sort of golden opportunity, really, to reinvent the Observer for the digital age. And it's something which we on the paper have been, gagging to do, to have a digital identity, to really think creatively about what the version of the Observer fit for the 21st century.
And you haven't been able to do that because
we haven't been able to do that.
Submerged in the Guardian.
We haven't. I mean, I think it took a 2-year battle to get a newsletter. We've never managed to get a podcast. I tried to fund.
I mean, I blame Alan for the whole in charge of this group, but he's remaining very silent.
Well, he did have his own
critique.
In fairness to Alan had his own controversy, of course, with the Observer, in which there was question marks over its future some years ago. And I guess the thing I would say at that stage, which is from talking to the ex-editor, John Mulholland, for example, is that when there was such a backlash, it was then, let's look at all the different options. Let's look at all the different options and weigh them up. And that process went ahead. And that's how we came up with the current version, which has strengths and minuses, right? Which is a very much merged, blended product with the rest of the Guardian. And that's why separating us out now and pretending we're different is one of the problems.
There was a process. That was a crucial thing.
And it is important to note, for the record, that the cumulative losses between 1993 and 2009 were £190 million of the Observer.
Just the Observer?
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you get that figure from?
From a source close to the Guardian.
Yeah, but the thing is that what we know is that there's. I think I take that with a pinch of salt, Lionel, because there's
a pretty large pinch of salt. It's a bucket of salt, Carole.
It's a bucket of salt. But I think unless you have transparency on those figures, then, to be honest, I would say this is spinning. And unless we actually open up the books and have a look at it.
Have you asked for that? I mean, I imagine you might. So it seems to me, again, looking at Alan Bateson's statement, you've been offered a set of what they describe as Observer P&L, profit and loss accounts. And then James Harding has a separate group
separate set of numbers.
And I don't think they add up, because when we had James on, he didn't dispute it when I said, let's say the Observer is losing 4 million. So, all this is accountancy, because it depends what you include in the costs. He didn't dispute that figure. And yet the Anna Bateson letter to staff implied that the Observer was profitable but would move into loss. So I suppose the question is, have you had the same access to the same accounts as James Harding has? And if not, why not?
No. So nobody at the Observer has access to those accounts. Nobody at the Observer has access to any of the underlying business figures. Nobody at the Observer has had any response, actually, to our requests for that. The Observer journalists are entirely cut out of any aspect of this process. There is no Observer journalist representative on the GMG board. There is none on the Scott Trust board. There is nobody involved in the due diligence of this deal. There is nobody involved in the decision-making around this deal. And in that sense, we're completely handicapped in this process. But what we have been doing is talking to a lot of different people, including external investors, who are now starting to circle. And in fact, we now wrote to the our understanding, and this was reported in the Telegraph, wrote to the management of the Guardian just over a week ago to say that they would like to put in a counter bid.
Telegraph said there was a counter bid that had
But-
got nowhere. And do you know anything about that counter bid? It's supposed to. They mentioned the name Dale Vince.
I'm not totally convinced by that. But what I do understand is that they were told to go away because there's this exclusivity period with Tortoise.
And what do you, because the Observer, Guardian, NUJ raised this friendship between James Harding and Anna Bateson, the managing director of the Guardian.
Do you want to just explain that to people who don't?
But I only know what I read, but it is claimed that there's nothing. I should say nothing improper is alleged here, but they are old friends. There's been a picture of what's his name, Charlie Dunstan's yacht on which they're supposed to have had a family holiday together. But the claim, as I understand it, is this looks a bit cozy. That this is the phrase I've read is it's a sweetheart deal. That they didn't test the market as to whether there might have been alternative bids for the Observer. Is that something that your colleagues feel strongly about, or is it a chaff?
I mean, I think we're profoundly troubled by it. I wouldn't say this. I mean, I'd say profoundly troubled by it because, and this is absolutely nothing to do with the individuals involved at all.
It's process.
It's process. It's just process, which is that if there is a prior relationship there, it has to be disclosed. Now, what we have been told by, I understand, the chair of the GMG board in response to the NUJ is that it was disclosed to him, but he didn't disclose it to other members of the board. And I believe he said the same about the chair of the Scott Trust. What we know is that there are individuals who sit on both those boards who did not know about that relationship. So it wasn't disclosed to the entire board. And it's not just about a conflict of interest, of course. It's also about the perception of a conflict of interest, which is really important here. But it is also about the conflict of interest because here you have two individuals who could stand to be enriched in some capacity by this deal. And again, it just comes back to the lack of transparency. If you are going to have a secret and confidential process with just one preferred bidder, and it just doesn't make any sense to us why you would do that. And then to have this, evidence of a prior friendship there, in which I'm sure there's nothing improper. However, that's why you just need to be upfront to disclose it so that everybody knows, so you have all the facts. And again, this comes back to governance. And that's the thing, I think, which troubles us most about the organisation.
Final question from me, Carole, is what do you think the relationship between the Scott Trust and the Observer should be? So we know the Scott Trust has a big endowment, 1.3 billion nearly, and its primary duty, is everyone agrees, is to the Guardian. What do you think its responsibility is to the liberal journalism tradition represented by the Observer, assuming the Observer is not a threat to the existential threat to the Guardian?
Well, so it was described to me by one former director of the Scott Trust, said to me, who was there, who knew the characters involved when the Observer was bought. And what he said to me is that it was always, he said Hugo Young, who was the chair of the Scott Trust at the time that it bought the Guardian.
Great Guardian columnist.
Yeah, and he said that he told this individual, he said, look, the Scott Trust is the citadel, and what we're doing, the Observer is going to be behind the walls. It's behind the walls with the Guardian, and so it's there protected, when it comes under attack. And he said if it was understood that if the perimeter walls were breached, if there was this fundamental threat to the entire organisation, the Guardian is in the keep, and at that stage, the Observer is out on its ear, type of thing. Mm. But the point is, we're not even there. As you say, is that in Anna Bateson's letter, it's that this kind of idea that we're an existential threat to the entire organisation, a financial basket case, that just isn't true. And in any case, we need to, I think making a decision so hastily in which the only option being considered is a financially struggling startup with no cash reserve.
Well, Carole, all I can say is, sticking with that citadel metaphor, it looks to me like Tortoise is the Trojan horse inside the citadel.
Very good, very good.
And we just have to see how many soldiers they've got inside, or whether they're going to be seen off by that powerful combination known as the National Union of Journalists, the combined group of both from The Guardian and The Observer. Good luck, Carole.
Thank you, Lionel.
It's the metaphors what done
But
it.
anyway, it was a